Okay, let's just do, yeah.
Since we are live.
We are live, great. Well, we want to welcome our Facebook Live listeners and viewers. I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today, and this is Capital Download. We're at the Commerce Department with the Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming to the Commerce Department.
You are the cabinet member in charge of the Commerce Department. There is no department more that's more an advocate of free trade and global trade than the Commerce Department is. But we've seen trade become an enormously controversial issue in both parties in this presidential election. Why do you think that has happened?
Well, let's step back for a minute. I think, first of all, it's really important to recognize that America's economy is really a sign of our strength. And trade agreements are something that we use to shape how we do business around the world. And one thing I've seen as I've gone around the world is countries want American products. And so the question is, how do we sell our products around the world in a way that's fair to our companies, but most important, fair to our workers? And what we've been doing in trade agreements is trying to make sure that we get market access for our goods that are made here in America, and that our workers are playing on a level playing field by raising the standards for workers around the world. And one of the problems, as I see it, is what's happened is that the American public is being told trade is bad. But that's not true. That's just not true. Supply chains are now global. Goods, we need inputs from different parts of the world to make everything from a bicycle to the manufacturers of bicycles in Portland to large manufacturers like Vermeer of Pella, Iowa, that makes large equipment that they sell all over the world, to Microsoft or to Apple. Their supply chains are global. So our workers, in order to do what they do, need connectivity around the world, need to be able to get goods and services so that we can make inputs, bring in inputs from other parts of the world, make products and sell them to the rest of the world. And that's what trade agreements do, is help us set the rules for that. The challenge that we're facing is that somehow trade agreements are getting caught up in what's happened in terms of globalization, automation, digitization, which are factors that we're not going to be able to reverse. The digital economy is something that is going to exist and is going to exist into the future. And so what we're trying to do with trade agreements is make it put the United States on a more competitive footing. What's happening is people are being told that's not right or that's not good. And I get the challenge. We understand that that growth is not being appreciated or felt equally among American citizens, and that some people are being hurt in some instances by some trade. But that's why we're so focused on being able to offer trade adjustment assistance, training for people if they're not feeling the growth that America is experiencing. And so I think what's happening is we're conflating a number of things, and trade is taking a beating because of it. But it's not really right. We cannot close the doors to America and assume that if all we do is sell to ourselves, that's a sufficient marketplace. If you look at the world, 95% of customers are outside the United States. We need our companies who make things here to be able to sell into those markets.
So this administration has been working hard on the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. What are the odds that gets approved, gets the congressional approval it needs before President Obama leaves office?
Well, I'm an optimist. I think we get this done. I know our administration is all in making sure that we get the opportunity to bring this to the floor. But how do you get it through?
You've got, do you go to, you look at the current setup, it's hard to imagine it getting through this Congress. The one opening some analysts see is in the lame duck session. If you have the results of the election on the table, you might be able to get an alliance between the administration and Republicans in Congress to get it through. Does that make sense to you? Do you think that's a strategy the administration should be looking at?
Yeah, the president has said that he sees the lame duck as the opportunity to get this done. And I think that I don't see what gets in the way of that. it's not, look, trade agreements are always difficult to get done in any Congress at any time. And so don't think we should be deterred by the complexity of this. I think what we need to keep in mind is, why is this so important? And another thing, beside the benefit to the American worker, the American companies, is to remember this is really also about American leadership. And leadership in the Asia-Pacific region, which is a region that's very dynamic, and there are forces there that are major competition for the U.S., like China. That's why countries like Vietnam want to see, and Japan want to see us having closer trade ties with the United States. Singapore, when the Prime Minister was here a few weeks ago, he said, look, we want the U.S. here in our market. We want to balance the powers that are creating forces in the Asia-Pacific. And I think the other thing we need to remember is the status quo is not sustainable. China is out making its own multilateral trade agreements in the region, and those trade agreements are not to the benefit of the American worker.
When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she described the TPP as the gold standard of trade agreements. Now she's come out against it, and more forcefully after questions were raised about whether she really meant her opposition. Was that disappointing?
Well, I think that I don't agree with that position, obviously, and I think that one of the things that she's focused on is enforcement and making sure that we're, she has talked about what should we do to strengthen enforcement of the agreement, and I actually think Congress has taken some steps to strengthen our hand at the Department of Commerce, and you've seen and the hand of the U.S. Trade Representative to enhance enforcement. Maybe there are a few other things that we could be doing, but what you're seeing is, I think that we should, step forward, proceed with this, because it will benefit our country. And I think that we need to remember that, as we move forward with implementation, there's opportunities also to adjust so that we're getting the full benefit of this agreement.
Do you think the concerns that Hillary Clinton has about the deal could be addressed? Say she's elected. Are there things that could be changed so that this deal would be once again acceptable to her?
I can't speak for the candidate. I really don't know. What I know is this is the highest standard trade agreement the United States has ever negotiated, and I think that it would be a real shame for us not to proceed with it. It really puts a premium on American leadership. It provides enormous benefits for American workers, makes our workers more competitive, and gives our companies greater access so that good companies that make products here in the United States can sell them into the Asia-Pacific region, the fastest growing region in the world.
You've known Barack Obama a long time, longer
Yes.
than any other cabinet secretary, right? Longer almost than anybody else in Washington, with a few exceptions of people in the White House.
Well, there's a few of us who've known him for a long time, but yes, I have known him for quite a number of years.
There are different models for how what presidents do once they leave the White House, as he's going to do within the next 6 months. There's George W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton. They've all done different things. What do you hope President Obama does when he leaves office?
Well, I can't speak for the President or the First Lady and what they will do, but I suppose, and I'm confident, they will stay very engaged globally. They'll stay engaged domestically in some of the toughest problems that face our country, and they will stay engaged
Problems
globally.
like?
Problems that we're seeing in some of our communities like Chicago, around the challenges of high unemployment among minority youth, or health and well-being, which the First Lady has been a great advocate of, supporting our troops. These are things that I think, I know they care very much about, seeing that our country continues to move forward and progress, and that it benefits all communities. And so I suspect that they'll stay involved in those things, but I don't know for sure.
He might turn to you for some advice. It's entirely possible as you head back to Chicago and continue to be a force there. Is there any advice you have to give him when you look at the experience of other presidents? I'm thinking both of Jimmy Carter and how much he was able to do as a former president, or even of Bill Clinton and some of the controversies he's been involved in as a former president. Are there things that you would say, hey, think about this?
Well, I am loath to offer unsolicited advice to the president as it relates to what he's going to do post his presidency. Right now, I'm really focused on what we need to complete between now and the end of this administration. But I do think that the president will remain a very active, public, engaged figure, not only domestically but around the world. And he's a young man.
How much do you think the library is going to mean to Chicago?
I think the library center, which will also has a community engagement aspect about it, which is why I think that the President and the First Lady will stay involved in communities, is extremely important to Chicago. First of all, it's a major investment on the south side of Chicago, which doesn't necessarily always get its fair share of investment. Second is, I think the location is a perfect positioning for extending the city an investment into the south side. And I think it's great that they have that commitment to my hometown.
You were the finance chairman for the 2008 campaign, involved, I'm sure, in conversations while he was thinking about running for president. Has he changed in the 8 years in office?
You know, the thing that that attracted me to the president from the get-go was his high integrity and, frankly, his commitment to how he's informed by the Constitution. And he and I have talked about that. And I don't think any of that has changed. His commitment to the American people and all the American people is something that's been unwavering. And whether it's as it relates to our communities that are in distress, like Louisiana, where he was yesterday, or as it relates to the challenges that we have of training or commitment to minimum wage, I've seen the president just double down on his values, and that's something that I've really admired about him, and it's made me very proud to work for him.
You've been here at the Commerce Department for most of the second term. What surprised you about, you came from the business world, what has surprised you about the world of government, the way Washington either works or maybe doesn't work? There's two things that surprise me. First of all is there's this rumor out there that the quality of people in Washington is somehow subpar, and that's just not true. I've met some of the smartest, most energetic, committed people that I've met in my entire career, and 27 years of my career has been in the private sector. And so I think that helping to get the most out of our government is really something that I viewed as a mission for me. And one of the ways that I think that we can do that is to really better partner with the private sector. And I've seen in this position that, you know, the challenges that we face around the world are so complex. The budgets that we have to spend on those problems are you know, have a limit, and there's such enormous complexity that I think it's important that we bring to bear all the resources the United States has. And one of those resources that I don't think we're using to its fullest extent is our relationship with the private sector. I think the private sector can do more in foreign policy, and therefore one of the things I've done is really focus on commercial diplomacy. And I found it surprising that that hasn't been a greater, we haven't used our private sector assets the way that we could. When you're inside Washington, it's so hard to get things done. You know, the whole town is so polarized, the relationship between the administration and the Congress and other aspects of town. Do you worry that after this presidential election, which is already pretty tough, that it's going to be even harder for the next administration?
You know, I think we've romanticized how easy it's been to get anything done throughout the history of this country. I mean, we're a nation of very opinionated people and a wide variety of opinions. I think that I I'm optimistic about this country, and I'm optimistic about our ability to address some of our biggest challenges. I've seen the progress that the Obama administration has made, despite all the rhetoric that it's, we're gridlocked and nothing gets done. You've seen really actually quite significant change. You look at how we've addressed climate change. You look at the ability to address the challenges facing the worker, whether it's having more apprenticeships, greater workforce training, making college more affordable. There's a lot that's happened. I think everybody bemoans that there isn't more that should happen. So I'm a believer that democracy's hard because it requires so many different points of view to be taken into account. But one thing I've learned in talking to the members of Congress is they're very focused on what they're hearing from their constituency, which is really hearing from the American people. And to get things done, we have to make sure we bring that to bear. And it's not just judgments being made by a few people, but judgments taking into account the point of view of the American people. So democracy's hard, but I'm optimistic that we can continue to make progress.
We're just about out of time. We asked for questions on Twitter for you, and here's one question. Let me just close with this. One question we got from Blake, who identifies himself as a master's candidate in public administration, so maybe someone who's eventually headed to Washington. He asked, what do you think of Hillary Clinton's plan of creating an exit tax on business leaving the U.S.? This is an exit tax to avoid that process known as inversion. What do you think about that? Would that be a smart thing to do?
Well, I'm not going to comment on specific policies of the candidates, but I do want to comment on something for Blake, which is I hope that we get more and more young people who are willing to commit more time in public service. We need more innovation. We need more entrepreneurial spirit. We need contemporary thinking brought to bear by young people in our government. So I'm hoping the Blakes of our country will come into government and spend at least a few years helping us to make the kind of change that they want to see happen.
Secretary Pritzker, thanks for joining us on Capitol Down.
Thank you very much.